All right. So yeah, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your background. I was reading up about your career, and it seems you've had a pretty interesting trajectory going from sort of like a sports management or sort of talent company with Octagon to being what I assume is a financial analyst at JP Morgan and sort of big firms to doing what you're doing now in sort of content and media. So could you just talk about your experience and what led you to where you are now?
Of course, yeah. First off, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And second, yeah, let's start all the way back. So for those listening that may not be familiar, I have four brothers. I grew up in North Carolina, and what that afforded me was basically like I always joke we didn't watch cable news growing up, right? It was Sports Center all the time. It was ESPN, all that type of stuff, and we played every sport you could imagine: basketball, football, baseball, etc. And I think like someone else in my position, I realized pretty quickly on that I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, right? So that was kind of thrown out the window. So I did what I thought was the next best thing at the time, which was to kind of set my goals on being within sports somewhere. And I thought originally I wanted to be a sports agent, right? So throughout college, I went to High Point University in North Carolina, and I got an internship at Octagon Sports Agency, which you mentioned before. And Octagon's a full service talent representation agency for all athletes. This was, I guess, 2015 at the time. So all these social media platforms were obviously around, and they were kind of just beginning to. Some of them were just beginning to take off. Some were already established, but I think really athletes were learning to realize the importance of what these platforms could do for them and their brand and their image and stuff like that. So we worked with athletes like Stephen Curry, Rudy Gay, all of these guys to really just build their brand on social media. I got an opportunity to go work in New York City in financial services. I started at a smaller firm at first, got experience for a couple of years. And then, like you mentioned, I moved on to JP Morgan. So I was an analyst at JP Morgan on the fixed income side on wealth management. And then I worked as an associate there. So I spent a few years there. Incredible experience again, obviously a great and reputable firm to work for. But really what it just came down to was like, I didn't see myself doing this long term. And I always thought to myself, like, hey, can I see myself, 2 or 3 positions higher than I am now, right? A managing director here, whatever it might be. But I just didn't see myself kind of living that lifestyle and doing that same career path for 30, 40 years. And that's really what it was going to be, right? So taking that into account, I really just kind of pivoted and said, hey, look, I want to get back to what I really enjoy, which doesn't feel like work, which is kind of the sports side. And I think as I got older and started working in kind of financial services, I realized that my passion was obviously still sports, but I still loved that business aspect of it too, right? So I found myself more and more asking, hey, how is the Kansas City Chiefs able to pay Patrick Mahomes $500 million? Why is Amazon spending $1 billion on NFL's Thursday night football game? So taking that into account, I really just looked at the landscape, and it really just goes back to kind of the core beliefs that are kind of creators are going to be the future of media, right? So the guys that are guys or girls that are personality driven first and have that mutual relationship with their fans, I always thought was very important and all of that. So I just thought that there was a really big opportunity to do it for a younger generation and someone my age, and just be able to come in and create unique content and give people just a different analysis, right? I think there's a lot of sports business kind of publications and journalists and stuff out there like that, but it's really just a kind of a unique spin, right? I like to think that my original approach was that some people are really good at the business writing of it, and then some people are really good at the sports, but there was few people that I thought were doing it really well, meshing them together. So, with that in mind, I started Huddle Up, the newsletter, and I started tweeting. So Huddle Up started in July of 2020. So we're coming up on a year here in the next, 48 weeks or so. And really what it was, I think everyone kind of, you move through stages of different projects and things like that, and you kind of laugh at what they used to be. But when I first started Huddle Up, it was really what I was doing was I was just taking interesting articles that I had read and posting them in email, giving a little bit of like my opinion or why I thought it was cool, and then tell people to go read it themselves, right? And it wasn't even like some grand plan. Like I wasn't curating a bunch of stuff. There was no videos, maybe every once in a while, but really what it was just I found myself continuously showing people different articles and being like, have you read this? Have you done this? Whatever. And everyone would be like, no, dude, I haven't. Like, no, you're the only one that saw this stuff, right? So at first, that's all I was doing. I was just putting, one thing in a Substack email and sending it daily. And it slowly evolved over time, and I started writing more. And then I took the links out, and I was doing original writing and stuff like that, and kind of still a good mix to this day of what I like to refer to as kind of some type of fact-based reporting or journalism to some degree. And then really it's just more analysis and opinion, right? Like this is what I think about it. And the way I thought about it was kind of the one differentiating factor is your opinion, right? So it's kind of the one thing that either A, people can't replicate, or two, like no one else has. So I always try to do a little bit of, hey, look, this is what's going on, why you should care, here are the facts, all that type of stuff, and then more of an opinionated kind of spin on it, and here are my thoughts. And with that in mind, right, like no one bats 1,000. There's obviously going to be people that don't agree with what you're saying or don't like what you're saying, even if they do maybe agree with it. But you're always going to have people that kind of go the other way on it. And that's totally okay. I'm pretty open and honest about the teams I'm fans of, my viewpoints on certain things. And I think over time, your audience kind of caters to that, right? Because people realize, hey, Joe really believes that college athletes should get paid. And if you're really against that, maybe you're not going to be a fan of my writing, or maybe you're not going to be a fan of the newsletter or my Twitter account and stuff like that, right? So I think the audience kind of, filters itself out to some degree with that. But yeah, I really just focused on Twitter and the newsletter to start. I use Twitter as kind of like a top of funnel, right? So I was attracting as many followers as I could on Twitter and then trying to funnel them down into the newsletter, where I kind of own the email addresses and could reach out to them proactively. My brother has a large online audience, and we started leveraging that a little bit, and we were trying to get, just the following to grow. And the one thing that was kind of super helpful in that was threads, right? And if people are on Twitter today, I think they might be overwhelmed to some degree with the amount of threads going on. And to be fair, I jumped on Twitter last year, so I don't know what degree they were going on previously, but it certainly feels like they've picked up a little bit, and kind of everyone's using them as some type of I don't want to call it a growth hack, but they're trying to
Right.
either build a following or filter people to newsletters or whatever it is. But a lot of people are doing them. As I started to realize I was working, I just doubled down on it really aggressively. So I started, saying, follow me too, subscribe here. And then what I would do is, as more people followed, I would tweet out the link once a week. And I got a little better at it over time. I figured out different ways to structure the tweets and the perfect lengths, and where to include pictures or videos, and what kind of stories people really liked, and et cetera, right? You just learn over time, I think. But that really accelerated the growth from not only Twitter, but the newsletter. I think, I'm about 10 months now. I have 38 or 39,000 subscribers, so call it just short of 40,000. So it's gone really well from a subscriber standpoint. And then Twitter, I'm up almost to 200,000 on Twitter. So that's been the primary growth channel. I've done podcasts, interviews, radio shows, people writing about them, different people posting content or sharing it, which has certainly added to it. But I would still assume that kind of the majority, if not like 90% of subscribers are coming from those Twitter threads and kind of Twitter in general still.
It's interesting that it's such a big part of your model, I suppose. Hearing you talk about this, you coming from a financial background, and even though you grew up with sports and even worked in it in your career, it's really interesting to hear you talk about things like creators and personality and marketing on Twitter. Like, it sounds like you have a lot of media savvy. Like, I've interviewed media founders who are just starting to talk about these things as sort of the next wave, and you've kind of already zeroed in on it as like a core part of your strategy. So I'm wondering where that comes from. Do you think it's just like intuition? Did you really heavily research how to grow these things? Did you model yourself after another newsletter maybe? Where did you sort of develop that awareness of what you needed to be doing in order to grow and scale and build your brand?
Yeah, so I always like to mention right off the bat, so people don't get angry, but my brother has a large online audience, right? So I think that was obviously helpful coming out. When I started on Twitter, he probably had 250 or 350,000 followers on Twitter. So his has scaled really rapidly. He focuses on finance and cryptocurrency, and kind of as those topics have moved in the mainstream during COVID, his audience has grown aggressively also. So kind of it's helped us both to some degree. But I say that because, one, I don't think I had like a some master plan, right? I just was really strongly believe that kind of individuals were the future of media, and legacy media organizations were in trouble, not only from like a trust standpoint, but just from a business model standpoint, right? I think that just the world of decentralization, people are inherently trust individuals a lot more than organizations. And the individuals that are working for organizations, sometimes it can be super helpful for them to have that kind of masthead that says, hey, this is where I work or whatever, and it gives them some degree of legitimacy and all that type of stuff. But really for me, it was just like, hey, when it's under my name, I'm kind of in control of everything, right? Like some people can say things or whatever it might be, but you look at kind of all the organizations and all the people who are growing really big media companies. And I hate to use the word influencer, because I see people refer to people all the time as influencers. Like Pat McAfee's a great example, right? I've I've really just admired his business, to be honest, right? And I think he sometimes gets referred to as an influencer, which is funny to me because he's just a world-class entrepreneur, right? He's kind of come out of the NFL and he's built a massive media empire with his show and his merchandise and all the other different things he does on TV and social media and all that type of stuff, right? So at some point, you see these individuals just turn into big media companies, right? And I think that was kind of just a really strong belief that I held. I don't think it was based on some master amount of research. I think it was just kind of through conversations and what I inherently felt. But yeah, look, I think that it all comes down to two main things I usually say, which is just you need really good content and then you need distribution. And I knew I inherently had the one advantage of distribution, right? My brother can help me retweet things. He can comment, he can like, he can amplify the message, right? And if I can get these things in front of other people and it's good content, then they'll share it and they'll like and they'll comment and they'll, subscribe and they'll follow and do stuff like that. So my main goal throughout the whole thing was just to focus really, really intently on the content. And it's obviously tough with the daily newsletter, right? I think some people, get overwhelmed, and I certainly do a lot of times. Sometimes I wish it was once a week and things like that, but just the amount and the consistency that I have to be able to compound over time, I think is really important with the daily newsletter. So keeping that kind of that content quality up was really important. And then I just saw once the content was getting really good and I was putting out good stuff that people were interested in, it was getting shared a lot, right? So there were certainly some tweets that, look, people, like I say all the time, it was certainly an advantage, and I'm not naive to that at all. But I always say, like, I've put out tweets there that just weren't good before. And someone with 5 million followers can retweet it. And if it's not good, no one's going to like it. No one cares, right? It's just not a good tweet. No one cares. It's not a good article. They just won't share it. So the quality was always kind of the first thing I focused on. And then I knew that if that was really good, that the built-in distribution that I had the advantage on would really be helpful.
So if you don't mind me asking, I would love to know some of your metrics on the newsletter, like how many subscribers you have or how many readers you have. You've talked a little bit about the growth of your Twitter metrics. So I'll just let you go ahead and answer that question if you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I started in July. We're May 26th now. I have 38 or 39. I can check real quick, but it's just under 40,000 subscribers. So from a kind of just a top line growth perspective, it's been really good. And then open rates are around 35% to 40%, depending on the day. Some days trend better than others, and et cetera. But that's one of the things I've really been proud of. And to be honest, like, I don't think I've focused on that necessarily. And it's not something that I kind of check every day, but it's certainly something that I'm cognizant of now, which is just the ability to keep those open rates really high and keep readers engaged as I am scaling the newsletter, right? So I think that those open rates would be seen as normal, right? And kind of just par for the course if it was a once a week newsletter or something like that. But daily, right? It's just kind of every single day you have to get people in the cadence of opening this newsletter, which I think is tough. And I'm really proud of the fact that has been able to keep up. But outside of that, yeah, it's grown really well. The monetization aspect, I'm sure you want to get into at some point, but it's just, I was able to leave my job at JP Morgan in September. So just a few months after I started the newsletter. And really my approach to that was just like, we were 2-3 months in at that point. And I realized like, this is something I want to do, right? So one, there was intent and passion and kind of purpose behind going and wanting to build it out. And then two, my next thing was like, okay, how can I, get enough revenue to be able to quit my job and do this full time, because I knew if I was able to focus on it full time, I would be able to scale it rather quickly, I believed. And, the whole thing for me was like, I laugh now, or people laugh. And when I say that I work more hours now, I think, than I did at JP Morgan, which is funny to some degree, because I think people on the outside view JP Morgan as a super demanding job. And it certainly is when you're in there and you're kind of putting in those long hours and depending on the work you're doing and stuff. But just being your own kind of entrepreneur and running your own single person media business is a beast in its own. There's just so many different things that go into it, as I'm sure you're aware and your guests have told you previously. But it's a lot of work, right? So my goal was just to be able to stop doing both jobs as quickly as possible, because it was probably impacting both to some degree. So I wanted to figure out the best way to be able to kind of just double down, right, and go for the newsletter. And what that turned out to be was through ads, right? So I was able to kind of put together a package, and I reached out to some advertisers and said, hey, look, I'm looking for one exclusive advertiser to just be able to provide me enough revenue so I can leave my job and do this full time. And I don't want you to do it on a monthly basis. I want you to commit for 6 months, so I know that I at least have a cushion for 6 months to really go and build this. And I was open and honest with them, right? I shared all the metrics. I told them where I'm planning to be. I told them kind of what I'm expecting from a growth perspective and all that type of stuff. So that's what I did. I was able to secure that sponsorship with Athletic Brewing, and I still work with those guys, and I try to credit them and intentionally plug them to some degree whenever I can, because look, they just, it wouldn't have been possible without them, right? So I'm really appreciative of that, and they've been great partners, and we still do a lot of stuff together, and I have respect for them, and they have respect for me, and all of that for sure. But I certainly appreciate and recognize that they were helpful in that regard.
Just listening to you talk there, I'm hearing so much of what I hear from people who are trying to build platforms for creators and from creators themselves. Talking about how you work more hours when you're by yourself, talking about the desire to quit your job and pursue your passion. Like that's such a fundamental through line of work that creators are doing and the whole world as it's continuing to grow. And it sounds like you were, I mean, when I hear the way that you worked with advertisers, it sounds like you were so confident in your product and in yourself as a creator and your ability to make it work. And I think that's really interesting and admirable that you were able to present your newsletter to an advertiser like that and make a deal like that that's so forward thinking.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you bring up, because I don't want to give people the wrong idea. I like to always kind of level set that I'm certainly more confident about it now than I probably was then, right? Because it's just all new, right? Like I just hadn't done it before. But yes, the one thing I was always confident in was my ability to kind of produce from a content side and kind of in continue to grow the audience side. So I've learned a bunch over the last kind of 8 to 10 months, right? Outside of that. But I think the one key thing was always just that I was confident that if I had the time to be able to go and do it, that it would continue to scale. And that's exactly what we did. So I'm certainly more confident now, but I think it was always just kind of that inner belief that it would work out.
So I don't want to force you to put numbers out there if you're not comfortable with it, but I'm curious now, almost a year into the newsletter, how you're able to support yourself through it financially, because it is, as you mentioned, a free newsletter.
But yeah, I've moved on from the single advertiser model, the exclusive one, and I've been able to bring on other advertisers. And what I've seen is that the creator model affords you one huge kind of advantage, in my opinion, which is the ability to package advertisers with multiple assets, right? And what I mean by that is the ability to put them in the newsletter, the ability to tweet about them, the ability to add them to threads, the ability to kind of pitch them in podcasts, right? It's almost kind of like what I would liken to an endorsement deal for an athlete, right? And I say that because I'm involved in sports and I write about them all the time. But the reality is, like, when you only have 3, 4, or 5 partners, you're able to charge really high CPMs, right? Just because you put them in the newsletter, you talk about them on podcasts, you tweet about them, you do all these different things. I've done videos with the CEOs of companies. I've allowed them to write guest posts and stuff like that, right? There's just a bunch of different options that I think that's like an inherent advantage of doing it on your own. But yeah, you're right. Well, so let's run through kind of the model real quick. So
Sure.
So I think the way I think about it normally is that I usually have 4 to 5 maybe sponsors at a given period. I like to structure them as long-term deals. And I mean that as in like 3 to 6 months. And they pay a set fee, and they get a combination of depending on what they want. Usually it's a combination of newsletter ads, maybe a couple tweets, and then like one unique thing, whether it's a podcast episode or it's a guest post or something like that, right? So there's maybe something unique that they would get as an asset. But I think that advantage has been really helpful. I was laughing about it earlier with someone. I got an email, and it was from someone who works with a bunch of other newsletters within the sports and the business kind of ecosystem. And they were just like, dude, the engagement metrics are awesome. He's like, we partnered with a bunch of these guys, and yours have really come back from like, not only are people coming to our site, but they're spending money. They're super engaged, right? So it's just been a lot easier, not easier, I would say, because it's like when you mentioned all these products and these companies that are looking to help creators, I think one of the biggest things that could be helpful for a lot of creators is really just for ad-based creators. I mean, the ability to kind of negotiate sponsorship deals, the ability to execute contracts, the ability to send invoices, take care of payments, do ad copy, get imagery, right? You start thinking down the line of all the things that are necessary that goes into it outside of what a normal creator has to do, right? So I still have to write the letter. I have to get content on Twitter. I have to get content on LinkedIn, on Instagram, et cetera. And I have to do the research. It takes a lot of time. There's just, you go through all these things and it starts to add up for an individual. So I think there's probably an advantage to take care of that aspect of it from kind of building a company. But to answer your question through a long-winded way, yes, it's gone really well. We're well into the 6 figures, hopefully in the 7-figure run rate here soon.
Well, congratulations. I mean, that's an incredible achievement. I'm sure it must feel like a huge relief to have gotten to that point in such a quick amount of time. Even with, you add all these caveats of, you had your brother, and I think it's good to admit those things, but it still seems like an accomplishment that, anyone would be proud of.
Yeah, certainly. And I always like to admit that because one, it's true, right? And I think that's always helpful to put that out on the table. But two, one of the reasons why I'm always so kind of for people who follow me on Twitter, it's just kind of like I don't put up with a lot of the nonsense of like, hey, it's all because your brother and stuff like
that. So something I want to ask about is the content of the newsletter itself. And I sort of want to start transitioning into your observations on the sports industry, things of that nature. So I can tell you from personally, I'm not a big sports person. I'm not involved in it. It's just been something that's never really hooked me. But I find but lately that's been changing because I've gotten into Formula One thanks to Netflix. And I find the way that you write your letter to be really relatable and interesting, even for someone like me who's not traditionally, a sports audience. I read a number of your newsletters and really liked your story about Monaco. I think for me, from the outside of this sort of branch of media, the most kind of content I see about sports outside of, game recaps and stuff like that when it comes to business is player contracts and things like that. But I think your choice to focus beyond that and talk about things like the cost of being a fan or the cost of sponsorships and things like that, and the economics that, locations that host events like Monaco, how those all work. I think that's a really interesting choice. And I'd love to hear you talk about why you decided to take that path and not just report on kind of the biggest, most eye-catching parts of the industry that are kind of widely clicked on even by people not in that sphere.
Yeah, so it's funny. I actually, the way I think about it is, would this be interesting to kind of the average fan, right? And I think that most people get scared when they hear people say that because it's like, we've been trained to just think that people working in niches, do the best, right? And if you can get 2, 3, 4,000 loyal followers, you can build an incredible business. And that's certainly true, right? For certain things. But for me, there was a great opportunity, I believe, to bring the things that people would inherently ask themselves as regular sports fans and connect them with the business side, right? So you talked about the way I write. And I think one of the things I do is I intentionally write in a very simple manner. And part of that is because I don't think I'm very smart, but the other part of that is I like to keep it very kind of like something that the average fan who isn't into the business side as much can understand, right? And it's very like, okay, Monaco is a good example, right? So everyone sees the yachts out there. How much are those boats paying to park there, right? To dock there? How much are they paying for that? How much does it cost to attend? How many people live in Monaco, right? What does the winner of the race make, right? There's just a bunch of different things that I think if you sat down as a fan of Formula One, those are questions you probably might have asked yourself during the race, right? And they're very kind of like forefront things. And it would be much different to dig into the balance sheet of Liberty Media, who owns the Formula One, and say, hey, this is how much debt they have. These are the bonds they issued, and all that type of stuff. So I think it's kind of a fine line of engaging kind of a broader audience, but you also want to provide enough value and dig into the details enough to where you're not just kind of repeating things that other people have said, right? So I intentionally target topics or opportunities to write that haven't been covered for a lot of people, right? So if I Google something and there's 10, 15 articles out there already discussing it, I won't write about it, because you assume that if ESPN wrote about it, or The Athletic, or Fox, or CBS, or any of these big outlets, Sports Business Journal, Sportco, et cetera, that people that are interested in this already know about it. They already read about it. And maybe they didn't, maybe there's some overlap, but there's certainly some saturation also, right? So I intentionally try to pick topics that don't dig as deep. And Monaco, I mentioned, was a good example, because one, I want to use it because you're interested in it, but two, there just wasn't a bunch of content out there, right? And the content that I found was actually false. Like, it had changed, right? It was just written so long ago that things had changed and numbers had changed and stuff like that. So part of it is certainly intentionally looking for things that are not out there. And then part of it is kind of making it super relatable to the average sports fan.
Next sort of thing I want to move into is to ask you about a couple different trends or movements that I've seen reported on in the industry and that are currently happening, and that you've written about in your newsletter several times, and just kind of gather your thoughts on them, what you think about it, what you read on it is, and where you think it may be going. So I'll just kind of quick fire three or so different things.
Okay.
You've written a lot about sports betting. I find that to be really interesting. Partnerships with the NFL, companies like DraftKings. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing there and the growth of it, and the future of that part of the industry.
Yeah, I think there's a few interesting things, right? So just the level set, PASPA was repealed 3 years ago in the U.S. It allowed individual states to legalize sports betting. And what we've seen is kind of an acceleration of that, right? So New Jersey is kind of the leader now. They call it the Las Vegas out east, and it's kind of become the biggest player in sports betting. And what we've seen throughout COVID and the pandemic is now a lot more states are considering it, right? Because they just lost tax revenue, they're not meeting their budgets, and all that type of stuff. So New York's considering it, Florida is passing laws and stuff like that. So what we're seeing is right now, I think it's 35, it's around there, maybe a couple percentage points more, a couple less, but 35% of the US has access to mobile sports betting currently within their state where they live. And Macquarie believes that that'll move up to over 90% by 2025, right? So 4 years from now. So really not far at all. They're just thinking that we're going to see a massive acceleration. If you ask someone in the sports betting industry what the total market size could be, you ask five people, you get five different answers, because everyone just has kind of a different belief. Some say 15, 20, 30, 40, whatever. And those numbers go up. But what I think we're seeing is, one, there's obviously appetite for it, right? So people that have the ability to sports bet are sports betting. We're seeing the companies that are trying to acquire customers spend a lot of money to do it, because they're incentivized really early on to grab as much land as they can and as many customers as they can. Because when you go to a new state, if they're only allowing 4 different players to come in and be operators within that state, they're going to pick the 4 largest and the 4 best ones, right? So DraftKings is a good example. They're going to spend $1 billion this year on marketing, and they're going to make like 1.2 billion. So just an absurd amount of money on just marketing. And that's what I mean by kind of just going out and grabbing as much land as you can. And then I think the other thing that's interesting is, we've certainly seen leagues like the NFL and the NBA and the MLB and all these other kind of leagues get involved and try to get their piece of the pie. But what I think we're going to see is we're going to see product innovation really expand the market. And the perfect example of that is like in-game betting. But in football, 7 seconds is great. There's a 40-second play clock. You can bet whether the next play is going to be a pass or a run. And there's firms that are doing this. Simple Bet's a good example. They're a firm that's kind of implementing this and doing the technology from a B2B side. But I think what we're going to see is, as products like that start to come up, the market's going to expand. And we're going to see the kind of the business explode here in the US. And
You mentioned earlier players getting involved in buying stakes in firms and things like that. Something that I have seen in the past couple of years, it's definitely slowed down in recent memory, I think, is traditional sports stars, like Gordon Hayward or Alex Rodriguez getting involved in esports. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you've observed there. Um, if you have anything specific about that industry, that'd be interesting. But from the perspective of traditional sports involvement in sort of that growing market?
yeah, so I don't follow esports religiously, right? It's not something that I cover all the time, but I certainly read enough about it and kind of involved in it enough to have an opinion on it, I'd say. But my general thesis around esports is the market just grew really, really, really quick and things became overvalued, right? Like you
Mhm.
talk about how you heard about a bunch of people doing it a few years ago and you haven't heard about it much. And that's exactly what I mean, right? It was really, really hot. Everyone was throwing money out and they saw it as the future of sports and stuff. And to be fair, some companies and industries are growing, and it's certainly kind of a massive opportunity still. But my general thesis around it is that we're going to see. I think that all of the teams will eventually have some kind of component of it. So Formula One's a good example. You mentioned that you like them. They have an esports league that they own and operate, Liberty Media. That's kind of combined, right? And there's content within their streaming app that works with the esports and kind of vice versa. So they use it as kind of like an ancillary offering to Formula One. So I think that that makes a lot of sense from a league perspective. And then I think from like an asset perspective within the space, the best investments I think are going to be brands that go outside of gaming. And I think that kind of scares some people within the gaming community because they're like, hey, if they're not winning tournaments and winning all these things, like, why do we care? And it's like, no, they're going to build like major lifestyle companies, right? So 100 Thieves is a good example. 100 Thieves sells sweatshirts. They sell all merchandise, right? They have the Cash App compound, right? They sell a bunch of sponsorships. They have the house everyone lives in. They create YouTube videos every day. They have podcasts, right? So and maybe they've gotten some flack for not winning and doing all that type of stuff. But I think the most valuable companies are going to be those companies that expand, right? So if you think of the Barstool Sports of the world, who can do that in gaming and who can create all those ancillary revenue streams and be able to compound their fame and their following over time?
Next thing I want to ask about, you mentioned this earlier as well, is the debate around paying college athletes. I am just curious about your personal take on it. You said that you had really strong feelings about it. And also if you think that that's something that's going to happen in the future and what the financial implications of that will be for brands, universities, things like that.
Yeah, I would start off by saying yes. I think that all college athletes should have the ability to earn money off their name, image, and likeness. And that doesn't necessarily. There's a million different ways to do it, but when you mention that, I think some people think, why should Duke University pay an athlete thousands of dollars every quarter or month or whatever it ends up being to come play for them when they get a scholarship? And that's not even necessarily what I'm saying, but it's just I don't want to get into kind of the bold claims, but it's just kind of like it doesn't seem right that you can go and they can capitalize off your kind of name, image, and likeness, and then you're not able to go make money on it yourself. So let's just take the easy route, which is just name, image, and likeness and endorsement deals. Why can't a college athlete go and capitalize on his name, image, and likeness that he has kind of put up over time and he is valued? Zion Williams is a good example, right? He was a bona fide superstar coming out of high school, right? And there's a million different reasons why that was possible, and one of them is Overtime, right? Overtime's a sports media company built for kind of a younger generation and high school athletes, and they really capitalized on that social capital and social equity online and Instagram and stuff like that. So I don't know the numbers, but I have to imagine he had over a million or close to it or whatever of Instagram followers by the time he even left high school. And that's someone, whether he went to Duke or not. Duke certainly helped his national profile for sure. Don't get me wrong. That's certainly helpful. But he could have been doing, if he went and played in the NBA G League or this new Overtime Elite League, he could have been making six figures immediately on kind of sponsorships and brand deals and appearances and all that type of stuff, right? And I just think that his inability to do that in college speaks volumes to kind of the system and all of that. But back to the original point is like, I think now we're seeing a bunch of different options pop up. And part of that is offering them different optionality of where to go, right? So outside of college. So there's the G League, which pays players, I think it's like up to $500,000 a year, and you go live out there for your college year, and they'll train you, you'll play in games, you'll get paid, you'll do educational, financial classes and stuff like that. And then there's Overtime Elite, which is similar in nature, but it's supposed to be for if you're a year younger, maybe, and you go live in Atlanta and they do the same stuff and they pay you 6 figures plus. You're able to capitalize on your name, image, and likeness. You're able to do shoe deals. You're able to, you get equity in the company. So there's just a bunch of different kind of things that they try to compete against. But really, it's just more options, right? You can go play overseas. You can do one of these kind of programs. And then I think over time, yeah, we're just going to see all these individual states pass laws that allow these players to go capitalize and make money on their name, image, and likeness. And it's kind of like an ongoing joke within sports. It's like, just, wake me up when it's actually happening, because it almost feels like every day there's a new state law being passed or a new update or whatever. And people write about it constantly and constantly and constantly. And I try to stay out of a lot of that kind of day-to-day movement for that same reason. But I just think, yeah, we're headed in the right direction. There's going to be states that are legalizing within the next 12 months. And the NCAA is going to have to respond. And the NCAA has already said they're going to be promoting and pushing forward plans that allow athletes to make money on their name, image, and likeness. But to be fair, like we'll believe that when we see it.
Well, those are sort of the three topics I was curious to pick your brain on a little bit. But we're running out of time here, and I don't want to keep you too much longer. So, as a final question, to kind of wrap things back to the newsletter itself, you mentioned when you were talking about your belief in the future of media resting with creators, how an individual can like become the next media company. And on that note, I would love to hear what you have planned for the future of Huddle Up, what you would like for it to one day become, or what you think next immediate steps are for you.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about long term, the important thing to recognize is that the audience eventually is all used for distribution from an investing standpoint, right? So one of along with kind of that creator centric part of a media company, I think the greatest investors will have their own built out audiences, right? And what that enables you to do is not only see better deal flow because of that audience and kind of that influence and whatever it might be, but it allows you to create inflection points in businesses that you invest in your own capital, right? So I think there's a point in time where, yes, I'm going to be starting a podcast, and yes, I'm going to be putting links on YouTube and videos and doing short stories and stuff like that. And that's all part of the media side. But really what it's used for is to continue to build up that audience and that distribution for investing stuff.
Do you, another question that I should have asked earlier, and it just occurred to me, is do you have anybody working with you on the newsletter at the moment, or is it just you?
No. So I have one person helping me out with ad sales and stuff, but outside of that, the newsletter it's kind of all the research and writing is me. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, that goes over my full list of questions. Before we head off, is there anything that you would like to add, or anything we talked about that we didn't talk about, rather, that you'd like to mention?
No, nothing. Nothing. Comes to the top of mind. I just want to obviously thank you for having me. I appreciate kind of the time and the thoughtful questions and stuff.
No problem. I mean, thank you so much for your time. I spend a lot of time reading and covering kind of the world of creators, and what it's like from every angle, from, like I said before, platforms trying to attract them, or the lifestyle of being a creator yourself and what that's like. And I think your story is a really fascinating success story of someone who's been able to really cleverly figure it out in a short span of time. So it's been fascinating. I'm learning a lot, and I think our readers are really going to enjoy hearing about Huddle Up and your story.
Yeah, thank you. And the one thing I would leave them with is I'm still learning every day too.